Today, I'm going to show you how coffee can be decaffeinated using just water with a method called the Swiss Water process. To do that, I've come here to Delta in Canada, just south of Vancouver, to show you around the factory of this place, Swiss Water Decaffeinated Coffee, the company behind the process. Before we dive in though, there's a few things to talk about. Now, firstly, there are other companies that have their own proprietary water-based process to decaffeinate coffee, but Swiss Water is the one you see most commonly in specialty coffee, which is why we wanted to come here. And if you are using water, you do face a little bit of a challenge. You see, caffeine is highly soluble in water, but so is all the other stuff in the raw coffee that makes up flavor. So you've got a challenge. How do you get the caffeine out, but keep the flavor in? And how different companies solve for that is what sets them apart and kind of differentiates them. Secondly, Swiss Water is a smaller plant than some of the other ones we visited. I say smaller, it's still an enormous space, but it's also a publicly traded company, and that means there are some restrictions on what they can show us and therefore what we can show you. Don't worry though, there's still plenty of detail. We'll get right into how the process works, but just from time to time we'll let you know when we reach the limits of what we're allowed to say. Thirdly, I think it's noteworthy that this is one of a series of videos looking at 3 different processes, but this is the only process where it's a kind of consumer-facing brand name. Speaking of which, you might wonder, why is a company in Canada called Swiss Water? Well, the process was invented in Switzerland in the 1930s. This company brought it over and commercialized it in the 1980s. They became organically certified in the 1990s and have expanded into this new facility they moved into in 2020. Let's go inside. Raw coffee will arrive into the facility. Here you can see individual lots warehoused behind me, and when it's time, it'll be brought up to this, which is the dump station. Here, bags are brought up and they'll be cut open and fed into this crate here, which will begin to move them into the facility, into the first phase, which is a cleaning phase, removing any kind of dust or anything like that from the coffee. What's interesting to me is that they run 2 additional phases before the process starts. Firstly, they run the coffee through a screen size sorter. Coffee beans can vary dramatically in size, and so knowing whether the coffee you're working with is uniform or a mixture of sizes is useful information for them going into the decaf process. After that, the coffee is polished. This means that a layer of silver skin is removed from the raw coffee, which they prefer to do now because it makes the whole process cleaner. Then the coffee goes to be hydrated. The coffee needs to be at a higher moisture content in order to be effectively decaffeinated, and here they don't just use water, but water with a mixture of coffee's typical solubles in it, something more akin to green coffee extract, which I will tell you about later. They take the moisture content up pretty high until the coffee is 50% moisture. Now it's ready to be decaffeinated, and this is where the secret sauce of Swiss Water process comes in. If you put raw coffee in water, the water would pull out the caffeine, but it would also pull out a lot of the other soluble material from the raw coffee. Essentially, you might decaffeinate the coffee with water alone, but what you'd be left with afterwards wouldn't taste of all that much when you roasted it. So Swiss Water created what they call green coffee extract, or GCE. This is an extract full of everything that coffee has in it, made from an initial batch of raw coffee. The GCE is then decaffeinated using a proprietary process that has active carbon pull the caffeine from the solution. Now, the GCE is an extract that's got everything that raw coffee has in it except caffeine. You only really need to make the GCE once, and you can refresh it during the decaffeination process. I like the analogy they used of it being like a sourdough starter that you just need to nurture and look after, and it'll keep going and going. When you put a fresh batch of coffee into the process and soak it in GCE and heat it up too, only the caffeine will extract from the coffee beans because everything else is already balanced. If you remember your biology or chemistry and the idea of osmosis, you'll get that there's no osmotic pressure to move anything but the caffeine out of the raw coffee. During the process, the GCE is circulated through the tanks, being moved away as it reaches higher and higher caffeine concentrations, and it stops being an effective solvent. It's then taken away and passed through that active carbon process to be both decaffeinated and also cleaned, and then returned to the tank. Their formulation of carbon is specifically designed to trap caffeine, while interestingly other manufacturers use a formulation of carbon that is specifically designed not to bind the caffeine. Now, we can't tell you exactly how much coffee Swiss Water decaffeinate every day or every year, but we can tell you it is a good bit less than some of the other facilities that we've been to see. So this is an extraction tank where the decaffeination happens. I can't tell you how big it is, I can't tell you how many they've got, but this is where it's happening.
Once the caffeine is bound to the active carbon, the only way to reclaim it would be to use a chemical solvent like ethyl acetate or methylene chloride. While these solvents are both safe and widely used, they go against the ethos of Swiss Water. As such, the active carbon is refreshed in a furnace which burns away the caffeine, which means that the active carbon can be used again and again.
Now this has nothing to do with the decaffeination process. I just wanted to show it to you because it turns out that moving hot, wet, decaffeinated coffee, that raw coffee, was hard to do. And this is the solution. It's just like a giant jiggling spiral, just gently vibrating the coffee along. And I love it. So after decaffeination, we have to dry the coffee. It'll enter here into this continuous dryer. The whole thing's vibrating to move the coffee through the system. It has 3 stages. The first one next to me flushes off most of the moisture. The second stage brings that moisture down to 10.5%. That final stage will cool it down.
While many decaffeination facilities will try and move the coffee off-site as fast as possible, Swiss Water have a different approach. The coffee goes into resting silos for 2 to 3 days before packaging and shipping. From their research and experience, they've found that a resting stage helps stabilize the coffee and make it more predictable and more robust for its onward shipping journey, or for its storage if it isn't going straight to a customer.
Now I'm going to take this opportunity to sneak away just for a second to this place, which has a great view over the facility. Mostly I wanted to just say thank you to my Patreon supporters. They have played a massive role in making projects like this possible. Initially, my Patreon let me do honest, kind of unbiased gear reviews. It still does, but now it lets me take on these much more ambitious, much more complex projects, and I am incredibly grateful. They're an amazing community to interact with, and if you're interested in joining that community, there's a link in the description down below. For now though, I just want to say again, thank you, lovely patrons. Now after drying, the coffee has to be tested to make sure that it is 99.9% caffeine free, and there are of course industry standard testing protocols to go through to do that. You'll take a small sample of the raw coffee and you'll extract it. Then you'll take that extract and use one of these. It's a high-performance liquid chromatography machine, and that will tell you exactly how much caffeine remains in the decaffeinated coffee, and they're what's producing that kind of click-clack clockwork noise you hear in the room right now. The coffee, of course, also has to be tasted to make sure that it's tasting as it should. It's also worth noting, the raw coffee from Swiss Water does look a little bit of a different color. It's a deeper, darker color of raw coffee post-process. But while we're in this room, there's one more cool thing I want to show you, and that's over here. It's this. Now this is their own custom-built setup, and you see 2 of those high-performance liquid chromatography machines here. They're actually measuring the caffeine content at 2 different points in the process, and they send that information from here to the control room so that the operators can take that information and make decisions about the decaf process as it's happening to make sure everything goes as it should. This is that control room, but this is one of those places where we just can't show you any more than this. Nothing on what's going on these screens, but trust me, I've had a look, it's very cool. Once the coffee's been rested and it's passed all quality control, it will come to a station here to be bagged. Now, most of the coffee here is going to be bagged into these 60-kilo jute bags because that's what most specialty roasters would want. I love a robot, though they also have the facilities here to bag up into the big kind of 1-ton super sacks too. The trucks delivering throughout the day are often coming from here, which is Seaforth, a sister company to Swiss Water that just kind of warehouses coffee. Being here, it seemed worth talking about 2 different types of coffee that Swiss Water are processing. Firstly, the kind of most obvious type is coffee owned by a roaster. They'll have sourced a specific lot and sent it to Swiss Water for decaffeination. Swiss Water are kind of supplying a process, toll decaffeinating. But Swiss Water also have a buying arm that are going out and buying raw coffee to decaffeinate and hold and sell in smaller quantities. You see, if you want to send your own coffee for decaffeination, the minimum batch size is about 4 metric tons or 9,000 pounds in the old money. And for many specialty roasters, that's just too much coffee. And so being able to buy smaller amounts is actually really useful and really important. And actually, only about 25% of the coffee that Swiss Water decaffeinate is on behalf of other roasters. Most of it is coffee that they've bought. Now, the end product doesn't just end up here, they'll also send it to warehouses all around the world for customers to kind of draw down from. They just showed me this room and I want to show it to you. It's really cool. This is a room where they're making custom printed jute bags. So this thing behind me is where they would print onto the bags like a giant t-shirt printing machine. And then it's fed into this thing here, which is kind of like a dryer, and then a dried bag of a custom print just kind of flops out of the end. I just thought it was really cool. And that is how you decaffeinate coffee using water, using the Swiss water process. And for us, this has been the third of a series of videos looking at 3 different processes. And if you haven't seen the other 2 processes, do check those videos out. They're linked in the description down below. This has been a big decaf project for us. And to be honest, it's been amazing to compare and contrast the different approaches of decaffeination. And there's one part left to compare and contrast the different flavors that those decaffeinations produce in a coffee. I cannot wait for that. But for now, I want to know, do you have questions for us? Have we left some stone unturned in the world of decaf at this point? Do you still have questions that we haven't answered? Let us know down in the comments below and we'll do our best to answer them. For now though, I'll say thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.